Thank you, Annette, for the kind introduction. And welcome once more to all of you. The issue of men and masculinity, fathers and fatherhood, has been receiving more and more attention in research, in the public domain, public discussion, and in public policy. There's more and more awareness that unless we understand men, unless we understand fathers, and what shaped their universe, and unless we engage meaningfully with men and fathers, it is going to be difficult for us to deal with a number of challenges, such as education, poverty, unemployment, crime, the phenomenon of absent fathers Annette had just alluded to, and many other challenges. And I'm not just citing negative things, because the debate is going to be very balanced. We do not believe that men and fathers are only the source of problem. We believe that men and fathers are a key building block for our society, and that they offer us possibilities and opportunities. So this is really what this debate, this conversation is going to center on. We will be looking at challenges that face men and fathers. We'll be looking at possibilities. Possibilities here must be understood as opportunities, signs of hope. As I've said, we are used to reading negative stories about men and fathers, and very few positive stories. And I hope that in this discussion we are going to try to be balanced and to show both sides of the reality. I've got with me a very competent and expert panel. I'm going to start introducing the members of the panel. I'll start from my right to my left. I'll start with Mr. Khanyile Nyanda. Mr. Khanyile Nyanda is a gender and HIV/AIDS activist and has worked with men for many years. Since leaving the private sector, where he worked for FNB, he has developed and implemented many male involvement programs. At PPASA, he worked closely with the Women's Health Projects and in gender health to implement a gender equity project within the South African National Defence Force, and train many SNDF social workers and other military personnel on HIV/AIDS and gender-based violence prevention. Since then, he has been actively involved in the Men as Partners Network and worked as a consultant with Agenda Health and Hope Worldwide to coordinate a MAP intervention in Soweto, and with UNICEF to implement MAP activities in Kandla, KwaZulu-Natal. Nyanda works for Sonke Gender Justice Network as a national project manager for Brothers for Life. Welcome, Nyanda.
Thank you.
I'm now going to introduce Grace. Dr. Grace Khonou is a senior lecturer in the School of Human and Community Development at the University of the WITS. She received her PhD in sociology. Her research interests include gender and social policy, Men and Health-Seeking Practices, Paternal Identity and Connection, Essay History and Black Middle Class. Her publications include Is Human Fatherhood a Social Invention? Attitudes and Views of Men on Maintenance. Fathers Don't Stand a Chance. Experiences of Custody and Maintenance. Experience of Custody, Access, and Maintenance. And her last other publication is Manhood, Paying Your Way, and Playing with Girls. Welcome, Dr. Grace. On my left, Mr. Njabulo Mbele. He is currently the UJ SRC Transformation and Gender Policy Officer. He previously held the position of the Chairperson of the APK SRC as well as the Academics and Quality Officer. He was also the Chairperson of the African National Congress Youth League, Sonia Banting branch. He is a graduate currently studying the postgraduate diploma in labor law. He has worked on various projects with Brand South Africa concerning gender-based violence, and he is a strong activist of gender democracy and equal treatment of the sexes. Welcome, Njabulo. I'm going to introduce Professor Robert Morrell. Professor Robert Morrell heads up the program for the enhancement of research capacity, PERC, at the University of Cape Town. PREC, based in the university's research office, provides support to academic staff while also promoting interdisciplinary research collaboration in Africa. He studied the history at Rhodes, WITS, and Natal universities, and has taught at the University of Transkei, now part of Walter Sisulu University, Durban, Westville, and Natal, before they were amalgamated as the University of KwaZulu-Natal. For much of his career, he taught in education departments, where he developed postgraduate courses in gender and education. Robert is best known for his work on men and masculinity in Southern Africa. He hosted the first ever conference on masculinity in Africa in Durban in 1997. His books include Changing Men in Southern Africa, African Masculinities, Men in Africa from the late 19th century to the present, Baba, Men and Fatherhood in South Africa, Towards Gender Equality, South African Schools During the HIV/AIDS Epidemic, and Books and Babies, Pregnancy and Young Parents in Schools. Welcome, Professor Robert. Mr. McIntosh Polela is former TV journalist and spokesperson for the Police Directorate for Priority Crime Investigations, also known as the Hawks. Based on childhood experiences, Mr. Polela has published the bestseller that we have, and some of us have. My Father, My Monster, a riveting book of hardship and rescue. Institutions Mr. Polela has studied at include the now Durban Institute of Technology and the London School of Economics. Mr. Polela describes himself as a literature nerd who dabbles in kayaking, golf, and horse riding. Welcome.
Merci.
Thank you very much. So after this introduction, we are going to delve into our conversation. And the conversation will have two basic parts. As I said, we'll look first at challenges and possibilities of being a man in South Africa. And then the second part, we look at solutions or courses for action or avenues for action, I mean. For the first part of the conversation, I'm going to start to ask some opening questions to the members of the panel. They will answer, and then we'll open to the floor to also get questions from you. I'm going to start with Mr. Khanyile Nyanda. As an activist, as someone who has worked through many campaigns and has worked with men and fathers, what would you point out as challenges as well as possibilities in working with men to in the area of gender equitable attitudes, or in the area of fostering involved fatherhood?
Thank you. This is quite an interesting question for many reasons. Challenges that are faced by South African men, it's not only here in South Africa, but you'd find that those challenges are global challenges, because how men are defined, how men are socialized, and how, as people who are sitting in this room, we want men to be. Men are not given a space where they could be raised in families where they will just be raised as kids, which also goes to women and girls. They don't get that opportunity to be raised as women, as girls and as children. And those challenges that therefore fosters men to behave in a particular way. Our media, the way it portrays men, it would look at things like the things that we currently see that is happening in our black communities, the culture of what is now called izikhothani. And you'd find that many men would therefore subscribe to that. We lack positive role models. In instances, you'd find a person who has never even been to school but is owning a 60 million house. He drives expensive cars. And those things therefore say, why should I go to school as a young man if everyone is able to achieve so much without going to school? It therefore says men have to do things that actually go beyond what we could call that it is theoretical. We therefore practicalize the way we want to do things, go as far as affecting the way we live as men, taking risky behaviors, doing things that we know that they are wrong and we shouldn't be doing, go as far as even not considering the rights of other men. Because also it is important to note that we are experiencing lots of men-to-men violence. As much as we can speak about violence that is perpetuated by men to women, but there is lots of violence that men have towards one another. And even though we probably don't have statistics that are available, but those are the challenges that we have to be talking about in order to bring changes in our country. Interestingly enough, there are men who are fighting and who are saying they don't want to be defined by how society wants to look at men. Because you would understand that men who are involved in issues of taking care of their families, men who are able to show love to their partners, show love to their kids, they are not viewed as real men. because remember, a man is not supposed to be passionate, a man is not supposed to show emotions, and that is all those negative definitions of what man needs to be. And as the number is increasing of those men who are involved in taking care of their families, we see a shift. And the shift, although it's happening in a smaller scale, because the very same men who are involved in issues of taking care of families, showing love, who also understand their HIV status and take care of their own health, they don't want to come out. They don't go to places, or they do not even engage their own friends and say, I am a good man. Because it is how they've been taught. Men are supposed to be strong. Men are just these animals, which you don't understand. And quite interestingly enough, even animals don't subscribe to some of the things that would expect them to be doing. So that is why it is important that as men we want and we have to seek to change and fight the definitions and say it is a definition, but it does not therefore say this is who I am.
Okay, thank you, Nyanda, for your inputs. I'm now going to turn to Mr. Polela. Nyanda just raised the issue of emotions. There are people who argue that men have problems to manage their emotions, and that is basically what most of the time results in violent behavior, murders, suicide, family suicide that we hear from the media. I would like to refer to your book, because your book gives us a good example of how one can shift from these terrible emotions and create a new world and move to new beginnings. So what can you tell us? What can you tell us about how men should better deal with their emotions? How should they reconnect better with their emotions, so that it does not result to destructive outcomes?
Thank you. Look, the way that we deal with our emotions is that we always retreat into our own corner and sort of try to deal with our emotions ourselves and not seek help. In my case, when I wrote my book, it was a process of retreating into my own corner and dealing with my emotions the best way that I could. We're not the kind of people that, the same way that we're not the first people to go to a doctor. I think it would have been very difficult for me to seek psychological help for my emotions. And so the best way that I could deal with it was to retreat into my own corner and deal with my emotions. What I didn't know at the time was that my book was going to become a talking point, and so I find myself having to answer the questions and people thinking that I can better deal with my emotions. No, I'm a typical guy who retreats to his corner. I mean, I still, when I have emotional issues at home, it takes weeks, sometimes months for me to share them with my fiance who is in the audience, and so. Men learning to deal with their emotions, I think it's going to take something very, very drastic. The society that I grew up in told me that the first thing that you're taught when you cry as a little boy, 4 years old, you're told that men don't cry, and as a result of that, learning from that and growing up, You know that you're not supposed to talk about your emotions. If you talk about your emotions, you're a softie. And I have discovered that I'm a softie because I shared my emotions with so many people. But look, I'm not sure that I've come to a point where I can say to people, I now know how to deal with my emotions. It's a process, and it's a long process. I'm a young man, and I've witnessed my uncles, and my uncles have never shared my emotions with anyone or myself, unless they were drunk, and you know what drunkenness does to people. And so, is that the best way to deal with our emotions? Of course not. But I'm afraid to say that even with an evolving South Africa, we're still trying to find ourselves, finding a better way to deal with our emotions. And I can tell you that retreating to a corner and trying to deal with emotions yourself is not the best way. And I've been blessed that, after sharing my emotions in my book, I have so many people who come to me and say, we also experience the same. And they start to tell me their problems, and we start to share. I mean, I received so many messages on Facebook with people who say, thank you for telling my story. I now have access to my emotions. I can now talk to my fiancé. But with myself, can I openly express my emotions? I think my book forced me to express my emotions. But for the entire society in South Africa, as I said, it's going to take something very, very drastic for us to be able to move from a shift where culturally we are macho and to a world where we sort of soften up and sort of help ourselves by sharing our emotions openly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Polela. And I would like to invite Professor Robert to come in at this point and maybe share with us a little bit about these notions of masculinity and how they shape the way we behave, the way we misbehave, and how they are key for any change we would like to see happen.
Thanks, Eddie, and thank you all for being here, and thank you for the invitation to be here. There is a lot to be said about this. I'll try and keep it a little bit short. And the instruction, I think, is to be upbeat. So let me start with a positive statement. That if you look historically, you can see really major changes in the way that men behave, which is, to go to Nyanda's point, always allows us the prospect of hope. That even when things seem pretty difficult, and they are difficult in South Africa, if we think of unemployment, we think of colonial and apartheid legacies, we think of a lot of people, many of them being men, who don't actually feel very hopeful. But actually, the message of history is that men do change. And the question then is how do they change and under what circumstances? And I want to now just briefly say a few things, which was my original brief before I got Eddie's questions just a moment ago, which is to say that men generally, when you grow up from a boy to a man, you are given a set of ideals, often by your father, by people around you, by your mum as well. It's not just the dad who has a role in creating masculinity. And these things inform the way that you think it's right to behave. And that is very important, and it's not uniform. So that from a white middle class person like myself, not yet 60 but not too far off 60, to somebody who's a few years younger and in a different circumstance, we'll have some things that are quite different about how we should behave, what music we like, and so forth and so on. And that diversity is important, because I think there is some danger in thinking that all men are the same and all can be the same and all want to be the same. And I think in a country as diverse as South Africa, it's important to hold on to that diversity. Because I want to use it as a launch pad to talk about the major changes in the last 30 and 40 years in the industrialized North, primarily as a result of feminism, which has asked men to embrace the project of gender equality, which means to depart from a position of superiority over women, telling women what to do, and to try and share life in an equal way with the women around us, be they daughters, partners, mothers, fathers, grandparents, and so forth. And that's a huge challenge, and it's a bigger challenge in some contexts than in others. So if in well-resourced northern contexts, particularly in Scandinavia, which I'm very familiar with, the equalization is a much easier project for both men and women. For women, because they can actually earn much more easily than men, and so that they can be independent of men, they don't need to be dependent. And for men, because they've already been initiated into the idea that actually women are able to support themselves, make their own decisions, decide whether, excuse me, they want children, and so forth and so on. So you have in the Northern Hemisphere particularly the idea of what's been called the new man, that the new man is this gender equitable guy who changes the nappies and allows the woman to go out to work while he stays at home, and so forth and so on. Almost a stereotype, but an important stereotype that rectifies other ideas of masculinity, which involves the man being the decision maker, the provider, the protector. So we've got one new set of ideals, and there are men who buy into that and seek to meet it. And then in different contexts, you've got different kinds of ideals, and particularly if I can talk about Africa, and it's not just Africa actually, the provider ideal is a major ideal of masculinity the world over. And what you have particularly in Africa is that most men accept, and here I'm talking cross-culturally, the idea that they should provide, but frequently economic circumstances mean that they can't. And so in a way we've got this huge burden that stands in the way of actually realizing this ambition to be a good man. And the good man wants to be the provider, wants to actually care for his children, for his partner, but actually can't. And you get as a spin-off from that very self-destructive behaviors, often drinking, multiple sexual partners, abusive behavior towards various people, which come from a kind of a self-loathing and a real sadness, actually, if you look at it in a different way, about not being able to be who they want to be. And I think one of the challenges of Sonke is to try and engage with that particular sadness that's structurally bound into our society. So there's lots of energy that we need to put into that. And my own work has tried to say to men who are unemployed, for example, who have fathers, that the one thing that doesn't cost anything actually is to love your kid. That doesn't cost anything. You can actually provide that. And the sadness about South Africa is lots of men don't do that. They disavow paternity. They deny that they have children. And there are lots of reasons for that have to do with Njabulo and Lobola and all the difficulties and the family dynamics that go around that. But I think we need to work very hard at that, because it's important for the next generation, the generation after, that our children actually feel loved by the people around them, and that includes fathers, and is often, unfortunately, as McIntosh's brilliant book shows, is not the case, that often actually the father has a very destructive role in the life of the child. So let me just recap then. So that men can change, do change. There are different kinds of ideals. Those ideals are not uniform, that there are different ways of understanding that one that one can be a man. And I want to just, excuse me, Eddie, for talking
Yes.
for so long. I want to say just one other thing that for me exercises me, that the idea of the new man seems to me to be attractive for good reasons for lots of people. But it's not something that everybody can do. And I stress the resource inequalities between Sweden, Norway, some of the richest countries in the world per capita, and with traditions of social democracy, with oil, with very small Gini coefficients that divide rich from poor. You're not talking about the same situation in South Africa. And so in some of the work that I've done in KwaZulu-Natal, where we've been looking at stick fighting and thinking about why do men still like to stick fight? Because that's sometimes regarded as quite a violent sport. And what we're trying to do in my work with Ben Carton, who's an American historian, we've tried to understand the ideals of honor that men still have in the way that binds them to other men. That when you stick fight, you're showing respect to the other person. Yes, you're also trying to beat them, but you're not necessarily trying to hurt them. And what you're trying to do is to create a value system that goes back into the African past that is somewhat at odds with the new man circumstance, which is in a suburban house with a job, with social security and so forth. And that's really not attainable for many African men. So we need to try and find a way in South Africa where we can honor all men in terms that are helpful to them, but also helpful for the people around them. And that's a massive, massive challenge, but I think it's within our grasp.
Thank you, Robert, for your thoughts. I'm now going to turn to Grace. You are the only woman on this panel, and I think that masculinity is always relational. So we live with women, and Prof. Robert had just alluded to the problem of absent fathers. The fact that many families don't have fathers, and children don't have that father presence. And we know that research has shown that healthy father presence is very important, not only for the child, but for women and for men themselves. And your research has actually looked at this relationship between men and women. And recent research has also shown that this trend of absent fathers has actually been increasing since the end of apartheid, to such a point that we cannot just blame the system of migrant labor for the escalation of the problem. So does women empowerment in general in the post-apartheid era, has that resulted in more tensions in a relationship between women and men? And does state intervention in that relationship in various forms, whether through the maintenance system, police, courts, and so on, does that provide a viable solution? What are its strengths and weaknesses? And one of your publications is about fathers not standing a chance. I would like you to comment on those issues.
I grew up in a family where I was the only girl. I was the last child, and my eldest brother was very masculine, and he believed that he was to protect me. So when my friends had boyfriends, I couldn't have a boyfriend because he was always watching me. But then also when there were parties in my Gasi, where I grew up in Soweto, I couldn't go to the parties because my brothers would be there, so they didn't want me there. So I was fascinated by men and what men do. When I just finished my master's, I was employed by the Sociology of Work Unit at WITS to do a study on retrenchment. And so I went to KwaZulu-Natal, the Eastern Cape, and I was interviewing men on work. And all of the men spoke about their ability not to be fathers because they were unemployed, they had been retrenched. And they also spoke about their inability to be husbands because they're unemployed. And for me, that brought the fascination with what men do back. And therefore, I began to study men. And I think that the problem for men is huge, because I think the problem of masculinity is a societal problem. Because where there's inequality, it does not only impact men, but it impacts communities, it impacts women, it impacts children. And the cycle continues. Robert mentioned the significance of the provider role in defining masculinities. And he also spoke about love. I think in cases where love is linked directly to being able to provide, then the problem of how to love becomes significant when you don't have a job. And I think that's why a lot of fathers run away when they can't provide, because it means they are unable to love if they can't provide, because the provider role is directly linked to what it means to love. And therefore, the best thing would be to stay away, because you can't love if you are not able to provide. Again, the provider role is also linked directly to worth. So as a man, if you are unemployed, you are not worthy. You are not worthy of having a wife because you can't pay lobola. You are not worthy of being a father because being a father means you must be able to support them financially. And therefore, if you don't have the money, you are not worthy. And I think at the center of not only men's problems, but also women's problem is our inability to be vulnerable. We are unable to be vulnerable. It's scary to be vulnerable. It's scary to open up. Because when you open up, you are going to be laughed at, you might be rejected, and nobody, either a woman or a man, wants to be rejected. And therefore, we keep to our own corner when we have emotions. And that's not only true for men. Being vulnerable is difficult also for women, but it is more so for men, because what it means to be a man, the ideal man, for many men and for many women, is that you must be able to provide, you must be strong, you don't get ill, you don't care, you are strong, you are not supposed to cry. But the reality is that as human beings, we are meant to feel our lives. And we can't decide to feel half of our lives. We are meant to feel all of our lives. We are meant to feel all of our experiences. And therefore, the idea of a man who is strong, the idea of a man who does not feel, suggests that as a man, if you are able to numb the painful, if you are able to not cry, you will then be able to laugh. But how do you do that? Because as feeling beings, if you numb one part of who you are, you numb all of yourself. And therefore, if we say to men, you should not cry when they are children and growing up, how do we expect them to love when they are grown men? Because we have asked them not to be feeling beings. So I think, at an everyday level, the biggest challenge that we have as a people is that we don't want to feel all our feelings. And that is more true for men, because we don't want men who feel. Because the idea of a weak man is the idea of a man who feels. A man who cares, because caring is loving, is feeling. A man who cares is not man enough. A man who cries is not man enough. And therefore we are saying a man who feels is not man enough. And that's problematic. Because being a human being is being a person who feels. And I think you asked me about the state and whether the state is able to address some of the gender challenges. I think the state is failing, because the state moves from a perspective of the man as provider, the woman as carer, the man as able and willing to support the woman. But the reality tells us that a lot of men might be unable to support their families because they're unemployed. Others might be unwilling to support the families that they have because of whatever problems or whatever fights that might have been. The reality is that people do fight. And sometimes when fights happen, people want to hold on to what belongs to them. And therefore, the man might not be willing, even if he is his enemy, he might not be willing to support this family. But the state moves from a premise that women, because of the history of gender relations, women are taken care of by their husbands. And men want to support, they have jobs. There's a lot of jobs. But the reality is that there aren't a lot of jobs. Some men are unemployed, some men are unwilling to maintain. So the state moves from that premise in terms of how to resolve some of the gender challenges. And I think it fails because the reality is very different. And when I wrote the paper on fathers don't stand a chance, is because of a lot of the challenges around gender violence, around the violence that women experience that is perpetrated by men, the state in trying to protect women, it creates other challenges because then all men are seen as the same. All men are seen as violent. All men are seen as abusers. And therefore, as a woman, because you don't have other kinds of powers, you might use that to your advantage because that's the only power you have. You might say, okay, I'm going to say that you did 1, 2, 3, 4 so that I can get access. That's not true for all women, but it's true for some women. And therefore, all men, when they go to the courts to get for access to their children, they might be barred from access because they are men. All men do that, and therefore, to some extent, some of the empowerment work that is supposed to happen, it is disempowering for gender equality, because gender equality is about both women and men having access, both women and men having access to their children, for example. But the reality, especially with the maintenance court, is that some of this gender empowerment is used to bar men from access to their children. And I feel that it's problematic because I feel that children need both their parents. I think for now that's all.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you guys for your thoughts. And Njabulo, what do you think? How do you see young men being able to have adequate role models in terms of masculinity and fatherhood? During our research on absent fathers, we used to hear from young men telling us that they didn't know how to behave as a father because they didn't have themselves a present father at home. So they did not have a role model, someone to look at. So given your experience as a young man and your experience in youth organizations, what can you tell us about role modeling for young men as far as masculinity and is concerned?
Thank you very much. Welcome everybody. In my experience, the closest thing that we have seen to a role model in our generation is a man sitting in a club surrounded by a young woman young enough to be his children. That is our experience. I'll quantify that. When growing up in our black families, our fathers are absent most of the time. For example, in my university, a cosmopolitan institution, majority of the students here are from previously disadvantaged backgrounds, single parents. And when we get to university, the role models we look at are some of these people. And since the new democratic dispensation, the focus has been on women so much that young men in society feel as if they don't have a role anymore. They don't have a positive role to contribute to society. I'll give an example. One day I was walking back to my room on campus, Mills Res, and I was walking in front of a group of young people, and they were talking about life. And he's saying, my challenges are this, my challenges are that, because no one can relate to the new challenges that men are facing in society, except for themselves. Because when we look above us, the only role model we will see is a person with financial flexibility. But they do not teach us the skills about life. And this young man says, my girlfriend is giving me difficulties. Why? Because she's seen an older man who has a car, who has money, and I don't have that. And that has taken away his masculinity, it has taken away his role in society as a young man. We call them sugar daddies, by the way. And the other young man said, my friend, why are you stressing yourself? Just clap it. Now, what does that tell me? That this issue of gender-based violence is not only an issue of the uneducated, but it's an issue of the educated as well. And we, as young people, have nowhere to go because of our picture of home. Because when you come from home, your mother will tell you, my son, go to university and become a good provider so that one day your kids can be there. But when I go and I look for a job, they say, no, we're only hiring young women. And that frustrates me. It frustrates me because I know that that young woman, when she looks at me, she'll be like, but what do you have? And therefore, I do not relate. So coming back to role models, we lack role models in society, and we have to look to each other. And to tell the truth, amongst each other, we don't have the adequate skills because we're still going through life and we still make the very same mistakes. And that's where I think young people would need intervention from my side.
Thank you, Njabulo. I'm now going to open up for you to also interact with our panelists. We'll take the first round of questions. I think we'll take 5 questions. And then you direct your question to one of the members of the panel.
Is the first hand at the back? I've noted you, sir. So sorry.
Okay, thank you. I'm from Sonke. And my question is to the last person who spoke. I get a bit worried sometimes when we try to make it the issue of... Sorry. Sure, okay, great. So yeah, just a comment on the last person who spoke. I'm from Sonke as well, like Nyanda. So we do work, obviously, with men and boys, but it worries me sometimes when people say, oh no, we are not men, we are left out now. And even in terms of statistics, I mean, you say, oh, they just employ women now. You see the statistics, that's not the case. So I think, of course, we need to try to see how we talk about masculinities and all that, but I think it's very dangerous when we really ignore the reality that still women are not in power. If you think of stats in terms of employment, I was just talking today to someone else. There are 8 women advocates in the country only. I think when you see all the judiciary, who are the lawyers, who are the judges, 8 advocates, women advocates in this country is nothing, Or then you see also the stat, who are the captain of industry, still men, white men. So I think it's a bit, that discourse about all men are being left out is a bit a dangerous one because it's not backed up by stats. So that's one of the things that worries me, and I do worry a bit in some cases. So I think that, to me, is a dangerous discourse when we talk about these issues.
Okay, next one.
Hi, Ron. Thank you very much for the talk. I'm coming from a lecture, first years, on race, class, and gender, so we had, to some extent, a debate on this. So my comment has to do with role models. My name is Anthony, a lecturer from sociology, UJ. theory states that people identify or take role models as to be people who they are similar to with regards to race, class, gender, religion, social background, and the like. I do understand that in South Africa there is an argument that we lack role models. And tying that to Isikotanes, this is my personal take on it, that we have a society where materialism and conspicuous consumption, what we call splurging, spending, has become the norm. So people are encouraged to spend it, to show it. I have, you don't have. That makes me a better man than you. So now my question to you is, how can that be reversed? And we also need to take into cognizance the role played by religion, by media at the same time. Thank you.
Take a third question and then we give opportunity for answers. And then-
Please, we take your third question.
Undergraduate here at UJ. My question is to Professor Morrell. Sorry. Oh, I'm Gatlaho, by the way, thanks. Dr. Morrell, my question to you is with the matter of fathers being disruptive in their children's lives. What would you attribute that to? Would you attribute it to the generation gap, changing values in society, or please touch on that? And then second question to Dr. Khonou, I hope I pronounced your surname right. With the matter of women dating or marrying or being with men who are unable to feel, and if I can explain it in my own terms, I'd say that young girls would go for guys who are thugs, who would treat them bad knowingly, or do you think that they wouldn't rather go for a man who can actually feel and treat them right from the get-go and not have to deal with the stress and the emotions that would go with dealing with a man who does not feel and is therefore just cold? How would you contribute that? Thank you.
Okay, we take two more people.
Just yes, okay, and then, yeah.
Good day to everyone, good evening. This is a very interesting debate, and I'm actually want to do a study on men and masculinity next year, because what I see in the media and the portrayal is that there's a lot of emphasis on the lack of positive, or on the, when you think men, the first thing that comes to mind in gender issues is how men always oppress women, and the rape and violence and so on. So my question is, how do we now move forward and start having portrayal of men and masculinity and in a positive light, and how do we make it cool, like cool in inverted commas, to be a positive role model, where now the positive role models are the ones that get prevalence in terms of time in the media and their portrayal in the media, because and how do we start now going from saying maybe the positive men, instead of them being like a drop in a small ocean in terms of representation in the media, to where they become the prevalence, and where the other types of men that are what is portrayed negative, or the negative side of the man is seen as the exception as opposed to it being the norm.
I'm Sonia from the Department of Communication. I'd like to refer to your comment on Iskutana and your attempt to draw that out. I think there's some oversimplification here. There's definitely a demonization of Iskutana by the media, by people in the culture. And I think we need to look at the complicity between demands of men to be providers and issues of materialism and being able to consume and to provide the needs for that. So I think we can't reverse anything. in that sense by the state. I mean, we all exist in this world, for better or for worse, through things and with things. They are extensions of people's selves. But how do we make this work for us all, or for more of us than rather for less of us? And I also wanted to ask about, I'm not au fait with the latest updates on paternity rights, state-given paternity rights, and perhaps that would be an interesting point of entry to begin to realign understandings of male roles in families. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask Grace to respond.
The question on women dating men who are unable to feel. The point I was trying to say was that because of how difficult it is to be vulnerable, both women and men are at times unable to feel what they feel because it might mean rejection. But then with regards to the question around why women would rather date a thug, not a good guy, I think why a lot of women would choose the thug, it's because of multiple issues. Firstly, the thug is a hustler. He will definitely bring something back. If you are from a poor background and you don't have an income, you are raising, your siblings, the thug is the best bet that there'll be food on the table. But again, the thug is cool because the thug will take you out to the pub. The thug is cool. The thug, in more cases than not, the thug fits the script of what it means to be a good man. The thug will clap you, will put you in your place. I grew up in the township and I remember that there was once a conversation, it troubled me a lot for a long time, that if your boyfriend does not hit you, he does not love you. I'm not sure if the script is still like that, but the thug was cool because the thug was the man, the thug had the swag, the thug was the hustler. The good guy was boring. The good guy wants you to get an education. The good guy, doesn't want you to fall pregnant too soon. The good guy might not even want to have sex too soon when all your friends are having sex, So the good guy is not cool. So it depends on a lot of complex issues who you would choose, If you are raising your siblings, you don't have money, you want the thug, But if you have brothers like you had brothers like me, the thug won't go because my brother would slap the thug, So it depends on a whole lot of complex issues. But the point is, we make decisions based on our position or our positionality in society, and sometimes where we are at demands that we choose the thug. And I think therefore what we need to do is we need to the question on positive role models. It must be cool not to be the thug. We need to get to a point where it is cool. The boring guy is cool. And I think the media has a lot of responsibility towards that. But I think a lot of us here also have a responsibility towards making the guy without the shoes. McIntosh in his book, he speaks about his experiences when he was growing up, that he didn't have the baby gene. The guy without the baby gene must be cool. We need to get to a point where because if the guy without the baby genes is not cool, then his self-worth is messed up, and then he will not feel worthy. But then and so if he doesn't feel worthy, he will not be the cool guy. He will aspire to be the thug. And if that's not what we want, we need to change. That which we show as positive. So we have a huge responsibility as citizens, and the media has a responsibility, researchers have a responsibility. I know the HSRC a few years ago, they did the Fatherhood Project. Robert, the Fatherhood Project was trying to create spaces in the media to portray positive fatherhood, to portray fathers caring children, fathers taking care of children. And I think that went a long way in showing society that men can be more than providers.
Okay, thank you, Grace.
I just want to share a little experience. One time we had a dialogue in Orange Farm. It was a dialogue of about 50 men. Part of what we were speaking of was positive masculinities. These guys are praising the people that they have in their communities. We've got so-and-so who is doing this. We've got so-and-so who is doing this. We've got so-and-so who is doing this. And this one guy stood up and said, guys, I hear you, whatever that you are saying. Nobody is speaking about me. I am the one who have served the longest sentence in my street. I've been in jail for more than 3 times. I've served 25 years, but why nobody is speaking about me? That worried me. And I'm definitely sure that would worry you as well. That a person would want to be praised for staying in jail. A person would want to be praised for being incarcerated. But again, you would understand that how we view issues of healthy lifestyles. Because when you speak of issues of healthy lifestyles, people think that you have to be going to Virgin Active, you have to be owning a particular car, you have to be dressing in a particular way. The main reason for this guy wanted to be praised is because his peers knew that when he was busy before going to jail, he was the best dresser. He had any woman that he wanted to have, and nobody is alluding and praising him. And it definitely says that as a society, we need to look at things that identify us as men, have our own identity. As much as we can speak about the lack of positive role models, but do we at any time, as an individual, as a man, ask yourself, what is that you want? How you get there, and what is that you need? Do you have the support? Do you have the people that you can talk to that can assist you? Besides looking at a role model, because definitely sometimes the very same people that we want to be our role models, they end up doing wrong things, and then we also fall into the trap of saying, oh, if ever he's able to do that, then you also say, I can also excuse myself. The other thing that we need to be cautioning ourselves is the belonging. We always want to belong. It is much more easier for children who would say, no, is at an adolescent stage, would go as far as saying, this is adolidoli, it will go. But young and old men and housewives, fathers and all sorts, they also have that peer pressure because they want to belong to the league. You'd find an old man, as much as speaking about Njabulo speaking about older men dating a young girl, you'd find that the very same man does not want to date that young girl, but because he wants to belong to the league. And it therefore says he has not at a particular time say, is this healthy for me? He has not said at a particular time, is this what I want to be? Therefore it is very, very crucial that as individuals, both men and women, we find our own identity. And it is very, very important that for people who have kids in this room, they start raising their children as kids, not as boys or not as girls. Just raise your kids and let them be kids.
Okay, thank you, Nyanda. Njabulo, do you have?
I'd like to respond to a comment. Well, not necessarily respond, but I'm just as worried as well. I'm not going to pretend to be or high and mighty and strong. I'm also just as worried. A friend of mine who's in the audience, Mbambo, said to me that August is Women's Month because every other month is Men's Month. I don't know how true she is about that. But in a study that we did alongside Brand South Africa, we found that young men between the ages of 18 and 35 feel as if they have no role in society. And that's why these young men are the first men to commit crime, they are the first men to rape, they are the first men to conduct these gender-based violences, because that is the only way that they can have control. And some of these issues go back, as other panelists have been saying, to the issues that we were raised. Because when I was raised, my role was to play with a gun. And when my sister was raised, her role was to play with a doll. And that was it. But as young professionals, young intellectuals, we do speak about these issues, but ever so often do we have the intervention of those who are older than us, because those who are older than us are focused on making money and being successful and forgetting to plow back to the very young who the road that they've gone through, they are currently going through. And I think that's our major concern as the SRC, as students of this university and as men. So we need to stand together and also say, not in our name. As young men, we need to stand together and say, these atrocities will not take place in our name, but at the same time, we struggle to have our own identity. And I think that's where we need to touch. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Njabulo.
Yes, I want to say, well, to answer the one question about fathers and the impact on kids. The absence of a father in and of itself might not be a bad thing. For example, there are plenty of studies that show an abusive father, for reasons of either drugs, alcohol, for acting out his own sad histories, is very bad for a kid. However, that biological father could well be replaced by another adult, and in our New South Africa, that may be another female parent. In lesbian relationships, it might be another. It could be a grandfather. It could be an uncle. It could be his mother's new partner. There are all sorts of ways in which a child can be supported outside of a biological unit. And it's really the quality of the parenting that happens that I think is very important. Because in a developmental cycle, of course, kids always fight with the father. It's the whole Oedipal complex, that it can't be the case that a child is always going to be well disposed towards the father. It just doesn't happen like that. But having said that, it is in the longer run far, far better for somebody to have loving adults around them. Which brings me to the really interesting discussion about role models. Of course, we don't have one role model, and it's somewhat misleading to think that we would, and it's slightly misleading to think that we should find somebody like Madiba and make that person into a hero. I think Madiba is a hero, actually. But if we pursue something that's really beyond us, we kind of miss out on the real difficulties of who role models are and can be, and setting ourselves up a little bit. So let me say that if you look at role models in the United States in the 1970s, you'd have two kinds. You'd have the men who went off to fight in Vietnam, and the men who didn't. They were both heroes. The one for the cause of pacifism, the others for a war of what we would now call imperialism. But they were both heroes viewed in particular ways, and it produces very, very strong civic crisis in the United States. So we should allow that there are going to be different kinds of heroes all around us. And I think the thing that bothers me most of all is the kind of idea of a gender fundamentalism, that we know that there's one path and we must follow it. In fact, what studies of gender and masculinity show, as I tried to say earlier, is that there are lots of different possibilities, and what we need to be doing is to try and select the best possibilities that are best because They're best for everybody. They're not best for a vested interest. And part of the problem of patriarchy, the rule of the father, or more broadly, a system by which men collectively benefit, is that the people who don't benefit are the other half of the planet's population, which is the women. So we need to be selecting our role models from the women around us, you know, who are respectful and loving, and from the men around us. And you know, it sounds rather platitudinous to say it like that, but I've interviewed lots of young men who only had mothers, and their role models are their mothers. Incredibly powerful, strong women who made them believe that they could be something. And in a way, I think that's very much your story, McIntosh. So I think, you know, we can talk about absent fathers, and we ought to, but we could equally talk about the incredible diversity and richness and the amazing role models all around us all the time. And that doesn't mean that a hero doesn't have feet of clay. Of course, we all have feet of clay.
Okay, thank you. Polela, would you like to comment?
You spoke about how do we reverse the trend of you know, people looking for excessiveness and being super rich. You will not reverse it. I mean, because for some reason after 2007, the changeover of the ANC, you started to see 40th birthdays as if they were 16th birthdays. And I can name a few people who had 40th birthdays, very excessive. I know very little about alcohol, but that's how I learned about Morrell, for instance. And you know, when you go to clubs now, to restaurants, and everybody aspires to have a Morrell on the table. I mean, it's because you know, the media fed you with this information, and then it's become the trend. And the media is a very powerful tool for young people. The reality is, I mean, I've been in the media. If a person just does his job, works and feeds his children, is not that interesting. But if he, you know, he eats sushi off women's bodies, and that becomes a story. I mean, Kenny Kunene gets more media coverage than Patrice Motsepe, if you have a look at it, because he's a bad boy. And in society, the media is looking for a bad boy. You know, we can have our own opinion about Kenny Kunene and about Patrice Motsepe, but the person who sells newspapers and who brings eyeballs to the television is Kenny Kunene compared to Patrice Motsepe, because you expect Patrice Motsepe to be a billionaire and to do what he does, but you know, you never know what Kenny Kunene is going to do, and that's why he is interesting. Talking about the issue of role models, I mean, growing up in our society, of course I looked at role models, and the first people that I looked at were men. But you know, the reason that I only started drinking a little bit of alcohol, only if it tastes like juice, in 2006 was because a lot of men, you know, who I thought could be my role model, they drank so much, and I didn't like what I saw. And the people that rescued me when I was an angry young man were women, and you know, I name a lot of them in my book. And so it is possible to have role models that are women. Women, you know, I have my role models, and almost all of them are women. And so what we should be looking at is educating men that they shouldn't be looking at the people that look like them to be their role models, and that women can be very, very, very positive role models.
Yes, we'll take some 2 or 3 comments or questions. And that's the last round, because we are left with 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Sure. I'm Luciano Mante from Faculty of Science. I would like to agree with McIntosh that to reverse the whole system is going to be a mammoth task, really. And we live in a capitalist system, and in a capitalist system, it is demanded of both men and women to be kind of flamboyant. So, and Kastwane, there's this saying that says, so men will do whatever it takes to like suppress or oppress women or whatever that means. And again, we cannot expect to reverse the situation by getting some help or assistance from the media, because the very same media is owned by capitalists. So they will feed this thing into us through their media channels. So I would like to know from the panelists over there as to how do we compare with other countries which are not applying a capitalist system like Venezuela and Cuba, which are like socialism system. Yeah. Thanks.
Good evening.
Yes.
Good evening. My name is Mulifi. I work here at the library. Before asking my own question, as we've been reporting this event live on Twitter, we have a question on Twitter from Rick. Actually, even Norma asked the same question. That we have a take a girl child to work day. What do boys have to encourage their growth as men too? My other concern, I don't know if it's a question, but I think I'm more concerned about what do we do about me as a young man. I grew up with a father, but he was my stepfather, and my mom. And my stepfather was very abusive. And he would just have man-to-man sessions with me when he's drunk. And he will say that the way I treat your mom, that's how a woman is treated. And says if a woman doesn't listen to you, you beat the hell of a woman. And if the woman, like he had a gun, and all the time my mother will overpower him, because my mother was a big giant. So now, but my mother will beat, my mother retaliates. He will take a gun out and always beat my mom with a gun. I mean, we're irregular in hospitals. So now, my biggest concern is, I've learned through my personal experience that children don't become what you're trying to teach them, but they become who you are. Now, as a young man who got married, I got married when I was 24 years. How do I help my kids not to grow up like me? Because at some point, we had men-to-men talking sessions. And I was young, I wasn't thinking about bills or what. So these things, they are implanted in me. Sometimes when my wife retaliates, when we argue, such events come that this one, I just need to beat her. So my question to the panelist is, how do we put a stop to this? How do we ensure that we raise a nation that doesn't believe that you need to beat a woman when the woman doesn't agree with you? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's get the last question from... Okay, so get the last from you and then we conclude.
Evening, my name is Tato. I am both a student and a staff member of the University of Johannesburg. I work in student life and governance. My question is, I think it's more of a comment than it is a question. I think the whole aspect of us saying that it is the media's responsibility to sort of shape how we reenact and enact our identities is a bit simplistic, because then we are saying that we do not question what we consume and we're just passively consuming what the media feeds us. I think as young people, we need to have that discretion of role models. You get what I mean? And it goes back to what you were saying, Robert, about how we cannot have just one role model. You pick certain qualities in certain people. I am a product of a single household. My mom is a psychiatric patient, but despite the odds, I decided that, you know what, I will, aspire to be what I want to be. And I don't think, basically I grew up without parents and without people that I could look up to, because I went to boarding school at a very young age. And in boarding school is more routine, more than anything. And I think as young people, we can take lessons from today, that we don't need to bottle all that up. Express it, write in a journal, do something, act on that emotion so that you don't battle to sort of deal with it. You don't need to going to a little corner and when you're feeling like that, have a blog. No one will read it, but you know, it will be you and you'll be expressing who you are. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's get the last.
Thank you for the panelists for a nice discussion. I just want to throw a question to the panelists.
Yes.
Back to the panelists, because I'm sitting here. We are debating about men. And my question in particular is that, I want to raise it in this way, that which men actually are we portraying here and in the world? Because in my experiences and my observation, in most black men, it's black men all over the world that are portrayed as monsters. You go to the United States, you go to Europe, you go to UK, it's black men that we talk about in most cases. And I want you also to think about that the issue that global power is asymmetrical. And we cannot discuss this thing without looking at the technologies of subjectification that we see around the world in terms of imperialism, colonialism, and all these things that we see, and the forms of domination and control that we see in the world. Someone talked about capitalism at the back as well. So I think we cannot talk about this kind of relation without also looking at those structural constraints that we still have and continue. It's not just a South African problem. We might be talking about what it means to be a man in South Africa today. But the issues, most of the issues, even the media, the way it portrays these issues, they talk about black men. And I think I want the panel maybe to tell me what men, which men are we talking about here? Because the way the media as well, the media is also serving a particular kind of coloniality. So those kind of things we need to grapple with as well as we talk here.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are running out of time. I'm going to ask the panelists to pick the question they're interested in and do it briefly.
Which men are we talking about? I think if you read the media widely, and I read it every day. I read a story today about someone who was supposed to be appearing in court for a decision, who allegedly raped and killed a child that was 10 months old, 8 months old. That man was not a black man. The Motemole monster is not a black man. And if you look internationally, Ariel Castro, the person who incarcerated or kept women captive for more than 10 years as sex slaves, is not a black man. So if you read widely, I'm not trying to defend the media. In the South African terms, you might find that there are more issues to do with black men because we have 79% of black people in South Africa. But if you look at it internationally, and I read the media widely, it's across the color line. It's not just black people.
Where do we responding to the question over there about basically the connection between the form of the state and the economy and the gender practices. For a long time, I think the kind of left-wing project looked first at the Soviet Union before 1989, and then to a kind of a socialist world for inspiration. It kind of works and it doesn't work. That gender violence is unfortunately a global phenomenon. It's difficult to see how it relates to state form. If you think of the Soviet Union and the major achievements they made about eradicating class differences and promoting gender equality, unfortunately the gender equality was most manifest in highly competitive athletic events. So Soviet Union was very, very dominant. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but levels of suicide, particularly amongst men in Ukraine, amongst the highest in the world. So there's a legacy there, that there were things that were not attended to. So I guess to say in a kind of very realist way, that we have an opportunity here to take the best from around the world, wherever it comes from, and I think that's the wonderful opportunity of South Africa, and to be to be careful about accepting models that don't actually apply. I mean, we can do the homegrown here, is what I'd say.
Thank you very much. On my side, I think for us to solve the gender-based issue, we should not apply a one-size-fits-all method. I think every single sector, students, young men, young professionals, they have their own models, and I think organizations like Brothers for Life, the organizations like Brand South Africa are trying to make advances, but they will need us, obviously, to also come in and say, let's play a role in changing our society actively, whether it's at home, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in the taxi rank. But let's speak about these issues, because that's the only way we can conscientize our community.
Thanks. I think as much as individual people in South Africa have a responsibility, I think the media is a very, very powerful tool. And although it does not determine what we think, it influences what we think is important, and therefore they have a huge responsibility in providing us with positive role models, not necessarily role models, but positive ideas of what men can be. And I think on the question, the Twitter question, I think because patriarchy does not benefit all men the same, I believe that as much as taking a girl child to work is significant and should be done, I think we do not want to create another inequality, another gender inequality where 100 years from now, we are now taking the boy child to school. Because not all boys, children have access to the benefits of patriarchy. And therefore, I believe strongly that equality is humanity, and humanity includes both women and men, and therefore, we should not try to do an equality that will exclude. And I think it tries to some extent to respond to your question around subjugation, that patriarchy, because of the history of colonialism and apartheid, obviously patriarchy in South Africa does not benefit all men, and therefore, to a large extent, because of poverty, because of migrant labor system, some of those structural issues impact more black men than it does other men, because economic positioning is significant for what kind of man one can be, and therefore some men, because they have access to to jobs and to different ways of defining themselves as men, they might not necessarily have similar experiences. And also masculinity is not experienced the same because of race, where you come from, culture and so on. Therefore, different men will experience being a man different.
I will respond around take a girl child to work. As my colleague earlier spoke, that it is statistics still do show that women are not at the right positions in this country. So it is crucial that we have such interventions. But the other important thing, we need to note that the take a girl child to work, it is also pushed by the business. And who owns the business? It is people who are in power. And who are those people? It is definitely the white people who are still in power. So those are the other things that as a country we need to be starting to talk about. But also furthermore is that with the Department of Education, there's a boy child program, which we need to start saying people with money, they need to be supporting that program as well, and give it a flagship that is given to the take a girl child to work.
Okay, Nyanda, there was a question on how do you restrain from the inclination to use violence. I don't know if you can comment on that.
Okay. You see, number one, we need to understand that you don't learn to be violent, but you choose to be violent. You would find a person said, he provoked me, she did that, but it was your own choice on how you react to that. That is why I want to go back to the fact that it is important that as a person, you start to find or want to ensure that in each and every time you seek a healthy position, because as much as we speak about issues of healthy, but if you're not healthy mentally, you'll always find a reason why you reacted violent, but you choose to be violent.
I think I want to add to the point on violence. I think when one says that I was violent because she did this, and you are saying that from a position of power, that you are powerful, you are in control, and therefore you will teach her a lesson. But then if you say, I'm doing this, then you are saying she's so powerful that she controls you. You don't have power to control yourself. And I think it's so disempowering for one to say, she made me do it. Where is the power there? The power is in saying, I will not do that. The power is in saying, I'm in control of my actions. That is power. Because when you say, she made me do this, where's the power? She's so powerful that she's making you do things that you don't want to do.
Okay, thank you very much. We are coming to the end of our session. I'm going to call Santa to come for the vote of thanks.